On this episode of ResiWeek, we talk Lightingpalooza, tapping into your hive, and when systems fail. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
We can't say the future without AI. I mean, there's no way around it. 50% of workers now believe AI is going to improve their experience. When I come into the meeting room, I need a way to incorporate my AI with what's going on in the meeting. It's almost a bring your own AI type of a concept. Most of what we do in our day-to-day is going to change significantly.
Hear the latest AV trends and predictions in this episode of Crestron's Smarter Spaces podcast on your preferred podcast platform.
This is ResiWeek, episode 365, Tackling Ad Hoc. Welcome to this episode of ResiWeek. This is your weekly roundup of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matt D. Scott for AVNation.tv. And this week, I am pleased to be joined by two of my good friends. First, we have Mr. Mark Feinberg. He's the president of Home Theater Advisors in New York City. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to be in southern New York. It feels like it's
New York,
South Carolina. Well, it feels like it's South Carolina. It's like 50 degrees out. It's awesome.
That's lovely. We haven't had that for a couple of weeks, which is also lovely. Then we've got my good buddy, Grandma Tim Albright. He's the founder of AVNation. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing fantastic, and you're just jealous of my hair.
Nope, not really.
Yes, I am.
I know Mark is. I'm not.
Well, Mark's jealous of your hair too, and that's just
I'm jealous of any
Mark's
hair. other than like that.
I don't even. I don't even know where to take that. Oh gosh! All right, gentlemen.
We've already gone down a rabbit hole. We don't
already down a rabbit hole. I meant to pull this ahead. Last week on the show, we talked about, just before we jump in, we talked about the Leon lookbook a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I reached out to our friends over at Leon, and they sent me one. And if you're a Leon dealer, go get this thing. If you're a manufacturer, go get this thing and make one of these for your clients, like for your dealers, because this thing is phenomenal. I spent a few minutes looking through it. And yeah, having really, really good manufactured photography, again, from installs that we've all done, that you can show designers and homeowners is incredible. Go do this. It's simple. Please, for the love of God, reach out to Leon. Figure out who they did it with. You can do it too. All right. We're gonna change topics. I was just very impressed with that. This comes to us from Residential Tech Today and our good friend Jeremy Glowacki. Lightingpalooza 2023 is going to feature 60 plus hours of lighting training out in Phoenix, Arizona in February, which I hear is a good time to be in Phoenix. It's probably a little warmer than it is up here. But I like the snow, so I don't care. That being said, they've got, as I said, 60 plus hours, a boatload of manufacturers, all talking about lighting and how lighting can help your business. Mark, let me start with you on this one. If you're not already in to the lighting game, if you're not doing lighting, and we're not talking control, we're talking typically fixtures and actual lighting design, how do you go about getting into a vertical that is typically a direct competitor of one of your subtrades, i.e. the electricians? The second you, we don't really sell much else in our world that competes with all of the subtrades that we work with. Lighting is a different animal. You have to be, I'm assuming you have to be a little cautious before you just jump in and start pitching lighting on every project right beside your electrician, especially if the electrician brought you in.
Yes, especially and that's one thing, we don't step on toes, right? If a designer brought us in and they're selling shading, we'll talk to the designer about the shading options that we provide and automated shading, but we're not going to bring that up to the client without the designer kind of buying into that, coming from us first. So I think it's somewhat similar. If the electrician brought you in, you've got to work with them on it. We do a lot of lighting control. We don't do any lighting fixtures or lighting design. I don't think I have a huge desire to go there personally. It becomes very design intensive, picking chandeliers and picking fixtures and picking, how are you going to light this art? You can't just, it's not like shading where it's like, go get some training, figure out how to install it and pick a few fabrics. I think it's even more design focused than shading is. So if you want to do it, you've got to go down that path. You've got to really get the education. You've really got to understand the design. How does a light affect an area, a room, a feature, a wall, whatever? And you've got to fully understand all of that. You can't just go in and say, hey, I'm going to sell lighting. I mean, listen, I sort of did that with shading. I put some shades in my home. I integrated them. I lived with them. I figured out how to install them, and I can start selling shading. I don't think you can do that with lighting design. I think you have to understand the design of lighting design.
So Tim, I like what he's saying because he's down the vein that I love in the design aspect of lighting. I have yet to meet a single electrician, and to be very fair, the majority of interior designers and decorators who have any understanding of how to actually light a painting or light a room properly or layer light at all. Most people that are getting into the lighting game, especially on the AV side, they're starting with pot lights, can lights, ceiling lights, whatever you call them in your region. That's all they're doing. They're not really doing a whole lot more than what the electrician is when he walks in and goes, yeah, you're going to need about 9 up here, maybe 1 in the middle. It'll be great. That's all you need. Perfect. That's all they do, typically.
Well, to that point, Matt, I don't know if then you're concerned about competing with the electrician. I don't think the electrician's making any money on the sale of those lights. They're making money on the installation of them. So they may not really care if you sell the fixtures.
Maybe, but you're still stepping on their toes. So Tim, what I want to ask you is, when you're looking at this and looking at going down the lighting vein, do you look at it as like a traditional construction avenue or integration avenue of your business, or do you look at it as a separate design focus? Because to Mark's point, most integrators that play with shades, they care about the design feature, but they're selling it based on, check this out, we can put the shade up and you can push a button and the shades will all go up. They're not doing you really need this really nice bisque shade. It will complement the paint in your room so nicely.
No, because typically you're working with a designer, right? You're working with an interior designer who will tell you it takes a bisque shade for that room, and then Mark's going to say, okay, that's great. Here's the lines that I carry. Here's the 3 different types of bisque, right? And what sort of control do you have, as opposed to going in and saying, here's the types of and the lumens and the color temperature of the lighting. I've learned a lot from you, Matt, about lighting design.
Sorry, what was that?
I said I've learned a lot from you about lighting design.
Perfect. Thank you. We're just going to cut that.
Which isn't much I've learned from you.
Yeah.
But there are certain dealers who can 100% go in and go, you've got an art collection, right? And there's a gentleman who works for a manufacturer now, but was a longtime integrator in New York that we all 3 know, who worked in the New York space and was on higher end stuff and worked with several higher end clients. And he and his team could go in and go, oh, this client has an art collection. This is the type of lighting you want for that, right? And their designers could go in and could specify the color temperature, the types of lights, this, that, and there, and then they would work on integrating the control and the types of experience the client would want. A designer is going to say, this is the feeling, right? This is the color. This is the mood I want to create. They're not going to come in and say, well, this is the load, right? That's the EC's job. That's the electrical contractor's job. On the other side, the electrical contractor, you're right, Mark's right, is not going to go, oh, you need this, that, and the other. You need 3 amps, right, for this room. That's what they know, and the zone. And so those 2 working together with the integrator in the middle would make a nice 3-legged stool to get the client ultimately what they want, which is the right color, right? Amplifying the space or amplifying the art or whatever it is they want to highlight, having the distribution properly, right? Because the vast majority of AV dealers are not electricians. They're not trained electricians. So they don't know that side. But the integrator will do just that. They'll integrate the design side and the electrical load side together with the AV and make it all one seamless experience for the client.
Mm-hmm.
So 100% they should be in this game, and they should know enough about the EC and the loads as well as the design aspect to be able to talk to both groups and say, guys, let's get and gals, let's get together. This is what we can really create for the client. At the end of the day, the client's ultimately happier than they would be if just one person, if one trade sold them the lights.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, gentlemen, let's change topics for a second. This comes to us from Residential Systems and a good fan or friend of the show. Hopefully he's a fan too. Mr. Henry Clifford, tapping into your company's hive mind. Read through the article. As always, it's a really succinct topic and covering the concept of doing essentially an all hands meeting with essentially everybody in your company and sitting down and not just taking the people that wanted to show up or the employees that you thought were best suited for this. And essentially they did the math and figured out what their committee meetings were running that they were doing once a month and looked at that billable time and then realized how much they think that they can save in efficiencies from getting essentially feedback and input from everyone from the basic installer level all the way up to senior management. Tim, you're now in a significantly larger company than it was back in the day when it was just the four of us. How do you go about determining the timeline for these? And I don't mean like how long the meeting's going to run, but how often do you need to have an all hands meeting? How often do you need to have like a project lead meeting with all your people that are working on managing those projects versus everybody involved versus senior management? How do you find the cadence for getting stuff done versus meeting for the sake of meeting?
So internally, we're a big fan of Vern Harnish and a book he wrote a number of years ago called Scaling Up. And Vern's overarching philosophy is that type of meeting happens at least once a week, right? And that is from a project management standpoint, from a purchasing standpoint, from a tech standpoint, and from a salesperson standpoint. So everybody's kind of on the same page and they understand where the project is going, right? Don't need to tell anybody, you two or anybody listening, purchasing and procurement right now is a little bit difficult with supply chain. I don't care what manufacturers are telling you, it's still difficult. And so having those weekly meetings will help the PMs say, okay, this is what we're telling, this is what we told the clients last week. This is where we're at, so we can update and quite frankly manage those expectations. And the techs can understand kind of where they're at on their list of jobs and go, okay, well, this job might be paused for a minute, or this job needs to be rushed because of whatever's happening on the client side. So having those weekly touches is incredibly, incredibly important.
Yeah, it's really good. Mark, you and I are kind of in the same boat, company size. And I think you and I are very similar to the majority of our listeners and the majority of integration companies in the residential side, right? How do you go about doing this or getting the same effect with this with a smaller company where it might be a little overkill to have a weekly meeting with everybody for an hour with your staff once a week?
Right. I don't disagree. And well, let's face it, everybody, for the majority of the people in this industry, is going to be 3 to 6 people. Mm-hmm. So it's not that hard to pull together. Kids are seeing each other every day anyways, and you probably don't need an hour because you all know a lot more of what's going on. I think we tackle a lot of what Henry was talking about, but in much more of an ad hoc way. We'll be in the truck on the way back from a job, and we'll talk about like what went well, what didn't. Oh, we should from now on, we've started like a company Evernote notebook, so that we keep all the little bits and pieces that we learn about, what are the right button combinations for the Spectrum cable box to pair the remote with it, or stupid things like that. So we're not always Googling things. So ideas like that come out of just having a problem and more break fix, as opposed to planning. I was in corporate America for over 20 years of my career, and there's a lot of paralysis in meetings. People would, these big meetings every week, 30 people would come, 5 would talk. People were, either on their Blackberries or whatever else and zoning out. Having a weekly meeting for the sake of having a weekly meeting can backfire as well. It's just a waste of time. I do like that Henry's company was looking at what's the return on investment. What does it cost to have this meeting, and what are we getting from that? What's the ROI in this meeting? And presumably, if they get to a point where there is no ROI or not enough ROI, they will have the meetings less frequently. But I think for a smaller company, I think it's a little bit more ad hoc. You just have to, pull people aside. You're going to finish a job early. You're going to have a slow day. So instead of saying, "Hey, everybody, go home at 2:00," hey, you know what, guys? Let's sit down and let's look at the calendar the last 2 weeks and talk about each of the jobs that was there. What problems did you run into? What happened?
Yeah.
How can we make it better next time? Like, what kind of processes can we put in place? What kind of documentation can we put in place? Any products, any apps? I mean, I just signed up for this app called Company Cam, where you take pictures. I found it on Facebook. I mean, the first thing I think I've ever bought from Facebook, but it allows you to take, it's a cloud storage of pictures. You can take pictures, you can do to-do lists, you can do project notes, project by project, and everyone has access to the app and has access to the account. So we're now sharing pictures across this cloud service, as opposed to everybody cluttering up their personal camera rolls and then having to text photos back and forth of what happened or what we saw. So that helps communication. So those things, sometimes you'll see a product that you'll be like, oh, that might help us. Sometimes you'll talk as a group and say, what can we learn? And sometimes you'll be like, wow, this was a disaster. How do we prevent that from happening again? But I think if a company our size is just going to have to, it's not going to be as formalized.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you were wondering what a BlackBerry was, that was the phone before iPhones. They actually came from Canada. It was a really big deal.
It was RIM, man. They had the market. They totally
did.
Screwed up.
They did. In probably 10 years, our kids will learn about it in business school, about what not to do, how to run a company into the ground.
And what not to do alongside Blockbuster.
Yeah, that one just faded out. That wasn't necessarily their fault. Rims was, that was.
No. Blockbuster didn't keep up with Netflix.
Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix for like what, $5 million?
Yeah, I think it was something reasonable. Yeah,
that was an oversight, a minor oversight. All right, let's hit our last story of the day. This comes to us from CE Pro. When building automation systems go awry, if you haven't seen this story, it is quite comical. I'll try to give you a real quick synopsis. There's a high school in Massachusetts that was doing a renovation, and they decided, the board decided they were going to go with this automated, like environmentally friendly lighting system. Long and short, the company that did the automation went under, was bought a couple of times, and the software failed. And they've got exterior lights that will not shut off. They cannot control them without flipping the breaker, which is just awesome. And again, they can't seem to solve this. They can't seem to fix it with essentially ripping the whole thing out, which they've done a full upgrade to get this dealt with. And there's the typical things that you would expect: blaming supply chain, blaming the previous integrators, all those things that we do on a daily basis. Mark, let me start with you on this one. How can we protect against doing this to our clients and setting them up with the potential to have an issue that we really can't solve?
Well, I think kind of against what most integrators are doing. There's a few integrators out there who are doing away with the rack and localizing everything, right? So
Mhm.
lighting control, they're just doing, smart keypads, from Lutron or Control 4, but not centralized lighting. They're not doing a video matrix. They're doing an Apple TV or a Roku and a cable box at every TV. That is a way to avoid a systemic failure. If there's a failure of one part, it's going to affect one room or
Mhm.
one light. It's not going to affect the whole home. I'll be honest, I shy away from centralized lighting for that very reason. If the processor fails, if something goes wrong with that centralized lighting system, the client loses control of every light in the house. Whereas if you just do what Control 4 calls wireless lighting, which is each individual
Mhm.
dimmer handles a load and is smart. Okay, if a dimmer dies, that light doesn't work. Yes, that sucks, but it's not going to make your house unusable. You can always throw a mechanical switch in there if you needed to temporarily. So, I think unfortunately, one way to avoid it is to simplify our systems a little bit and not do as complicated systems and keep them a little bit more localized. You're never going to be able to avoid technical failures, hardware failures, software failures, an upgrade gone wrong, a firmware update gone wrong. Those things are going to happen. And as we saw over the last 3 years, supply chain issues can happen. Now I'm not taking my own medicine. I still do a rack. I just don't do centralized lighting. I do centralized video as much as audio and video as much as I can now. So, but I think that if you really truly want to have it never happen, don't do it as a centralized system.
That's a good point. Tim, let me kind of change the direction slightly. How do you go about handling this when it happens? And I'll give you a couple examples. The last year and a bit, we've lost Oro has essentially gone under for all intents and purposes. Insteon canceled their, I believe it was called Blue. Sonos had an issue a couple of years ago where they sunsetted a bunch of devices and they became standalone and then not really supported. My company currently is dealing with a bunch of surveillance systems, CCTV systems, where the manufacturer has been now bought and sold multiple times and then dropped. And we don't have, as phones have advanced, our clients have lost their ability to remotely view their cameras because the apps aren't supported and nothing works. When that happens, how do you communicate that to a client? How do you have that conversation of stuff happens, we're sorry, but here's our solution going forward? Is there a way to do that diplomatically without getting yelled at? Because I'm tired of getting yelled at is what I'm saying here.
Yeah, there's a couple things, and this is not this is Tim Albright personal opinion, right? This is why the client needs to own the code, right? First and foremost, and there are programmers and control and automation programmers and dealers who will argue with me up one side and down the other. But this is why, because if the original integrator goes out of business, well, then they still have it, right? They still have it. And depending on which version of an integrator, I'll pick on one for a second. Dave Hatz, a number of years ago, this is probably 3 or 4 jobs ago for Dave, he was told on a Friday afternoon that the company he worked for was going out of business that day. And Hatz, to his credit, spent the Friday copying the code for clients that he personally knew and worked on to get them access to that, because if he hadn't, then those clients wouldn't have access to that and they'd be in the same position. So that's number one. Okay. The second part, and that's on the integrator side, right? If an integrator goes out of business, then the client still has the ability to hand that off to somebody like Mark or somebody like you and say, here's the last known working code that my last integrator had. The second part you're asking, though, is on the manufacturing side. The manufacturer goes out of business or they stop supporting the app. That really, that's technically not on you, because the manufacturer going out of business is not inherently your fault or your but it is your problem, because you're the one tasked with supporting it. And for that is constant and open communication. One of the things that I've learned being at CTI is giving you a reason to contact and giving you a reason to get a hold of your clients, right? That's imperative in continuing the sales process and continuing the relationship. And so as you're seeing stories, or as the manufacturers are updating you on what's going on, that's assuming they are, right? Not every time a company goes out of business are they going to, send out a flag and say, hey, by the way, guys, we're going away. Sometimes you just happen upon their website one day and holy crap, they're out of business. But communicating that and saying, hey, you have in your system, right, and whatever CRM you guys use, you should be able to go into your CRM and say, okay, type in, X10 lighting, right? And that for people who are not old enough, just go Google it. It's fine. Hey,
Terrible.
We noticed that you have X10 lighting that we installed 30 years ago. They're no longer in business. So you're certainly more than willing to, or we're more than willing to support it as long as we can. But there's no more updates. There's no more available product to keep that system up and running. Here are your options, right? And it's not being opportunistic. You're informing them, right? You're giving them options. You don't have to do anything right now. If your system's working fine, great, awesome, groovy. But if it's an app-based system, there will come a point in time when that app will no longer work because Apple's going to update their OS, or Android's going to update their OS. At that point in time, if you want to maintain the functionality that you have today, well, then we'll have to look at some of these options. And here's some great companies over here that have a similar feel and function and in the same price range, right? So it comes down to communication with your clients. As you know something, they pretty much need to know it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, gentlemen, let's leave it there. Thank you both so much for joining us. Tim, if people want to connect with you, learn more about AVNation or CTI, how can they do that?
They don't. They can't.
That's fine. All he does is
He's
tweet
so
about the
warm and
Bears
fuzzy.
and the St. Louis Blues. Is that what their name
The
is?
Blues, the St. Louis soccer team coming up. So that's exciting.
Isn't that football?
Professional soccer in St. Louis. So that's cool. No, for AVNation TV, and for CTI, CTI.com. And we don't do homes or residential, but we know folks. And if we're in New York, we call Mark. And if we're ever in Canada, we call Matt. And if we're anything west of the Mississippi, there's a young man out of San Francisco that we get a hold of. So
He's not in the business anymore. He's out. All right. Mark, if people want to connect with you, learn more about Home Theater Advisors.
Best is Mark at Home Theater Advisors or at HT Advisors throughout social media.
Excellent. Thank you both again for joining us. If you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at Matt D. Scott on Twitter and most other social platforms. But more importantly, please visit avnation.tv, where you'll find this show as well as a wide variety of other shows with all the verticals that we cover. When you visit the website, please take a moment to check out our supporters. We are extremely thankful for their support and ask that you check them out as well. Thanks again for watching. That's all the time we have for this episode of ResiWeek.